Okay, so welcome to part two. And in part one, we got our shirt to this stage with the collar and the fronts and the backs sewn together. And now we're going to be working with the sleeve. So we're actually going to put Harvey and his partly made shirt to one side for the moment, because we're going to take our sleeve pieces, which are actually the last pieces that we need to be sewing for this garment. Just pop our pattern piece straight away into the freezer bag just to keep that safe. And then we know which is the right side of our fabric because we've got our pin in it with the pin head on, so that we know that that's the right side of our fabric. First thing that we're going to do is actually deal with this bottom hem edge, and we're going to get our ironing mat out, and then we're going to fold that twice in order that then that will look lovely and neat. And if we just hold this up against the shirt on Harvey, we can see we've got enough there to be able to do that, because we're going to have some seam allowance at the top there, and it's going to sort of fit under his arm, but we can still see that that goes quite nice and long, so we're not too worried. We did add 1/4 inch seam allowance, but I think I'm going to actually take that up slightly and probably end up using 1/2 inch in the end, and that's what I just wanted to just double check really, to make sure that we were going to have enough and it wasn't going to be 3/4 length up his arms. So let me get my ironing mat and we'll get started. Okay, so working with one piece at a time. I've just got it face side up at the moment whilst I'm working on it. I'm going to just take the pin out because I just wanted to give this a good press first off, just to make sure we don't sort of, as we're sewing this later, sew any creases into this fabric. I've got the steam on just to help steam that, and cotton takes steam really well. So we know we're right side up at the moment, and we could have done it either way, so I'm going to turn it over now so that my right side's at the back. And the first thing that I want you to note is that this sleeve is not symmetrical. Can you see the difference in the curve there? That is exactly right and correct, and that's how it's supposed to be. So don't go thinking that you need to snip anything off, because that is right. And on here you can see there's a sharper curve here, which will be the front, and then a more relaxed curve there, which I believe will be the back. So I'm going to use my seam gauge, which I like to use a lot, because what we're going to do is we're going to turn this seam up by 1/4 inch or 1/2 centimetre, and then what I do with my pressing mat is I put a pin in to hold it in place. Saves you having burnt fingers. And again on here I'm going to put that little pin in there as well. And measure this side as well. So this is our first turn, so I'm just going to press that in place just in between those pins, just until it's nice and flat, and then we can take our pins out and just give it a bit more of a thorough turn, and then we're going to just turn it over again just to encompass the whole of that actual raw edge. And it's roughly by about 1/4 inch again on the second. I've just done it exactly so that the raw edge was down at the bottom of the hem there, so that will just take care of that. I'm going to do that on both of them. Now, because the curve is different, you do need to make sure that you have got a left and a right for these curves. So when you put them together, you need to, when the right side's up, you need to make sure that either that you have the two more steady ski slopes, if you like, of the curve together, or you have them this way, so that you've got the two severe ski slope of the curve. Because if you have one like that, so you've got them across from each other, you've got two rights or two lefts, and that won't be right. So this is where we did our little trick, if you remember, of putting our pin in to remind us which is the right way. But now that we've ironed that hem across to the wrong side, then we've now got that to remind us. So we don't necessarily need the pin in, but it's always useful just to have it if you need to. So let's just do the same again with this one. Let me just take the pin out and turn this up, so I've got the wrong side up on this one. And that's what I need to remember, because then I'm just going to repeat the process and then pop the pins in to hold the hem up and press the hem. If you'd like to do the same, and then we'll come back. And so once you've got both of your hem's turned up like this. You can put a pin in to hold it if you like, but normally on cotton the iron and crease will actually hold for you. So let's just pop that onto our sewing machine, and we're just going to sew just nice and close to this top crease. So I've still got it on a 2.2 construction stitch length. I'm just going to reverse at the start and the stop. Have some pins in if you're concerned at all. Take the threads off. We've got a nice little neat hem on the bottom of our shirt. That's the inside and that's the outside. So I'm going to do the same on the other one as well, and then we are going to do some gathering stitches across the top, and I'll show you how to do those. Now we're going to be putting these sleeves in a method that is called in the flat, and what I want to show you is just roughly what that means. If we were sewing a garment, an adult garment, then generally you have a lot more room to work with because obviously the scale is so much bigger. And if we were working with an adult or a children's garment in that, or doing any tailoring, we would join this side seam together first on the shirt, and then you would put your sleeve inside. You'd sew the inside sleeve underarm seam. Sorry, I do apologise. You can tell I've had a break, can't you, overnight? Would sew the underarm seam first, and then we'd then slot it in here and sew it in the round. But we don't have enough room to do that on a small garment like this, so we're going to actually sew it in the flat. And what that means is that we will leave that underarm seam open and leave this side seam open, and then we're going to match the sleeve to fit inside this curve. And when you first pop the two against each other, you're going to think, wow, the edge of the sleeve is so much longer than the edge that's shown in the actual, if I put it like that, look, if you think that this joining bit here is going to go onto here, and then all of this here has got to fit into there, to the other side, and it can feel a bit daunting and you're not quite sure how to do it. But what we actually do is we put some little gathering stitches across the top here, and that helps all of these fibres just pull in tighter together, and it'll give you a lovely curve on the top of your sleeve. So I'm going to show you how you do that. And if you're a beginner, and even if you're more advanced, I still do this sometimes as well, is get your contrast thread out and let's do our gathering stitches in a thread, that colour that we can see. It doesn't have to be quite as big a contrast as this, but just so that you can see it, in order that when we remove those gathering stitches at the end, which we will be doing, then you can see easily which is the stitches to take out and which aren't. So it only takes a few seconds just to change your thread over, and getting used to changing your thread colours is a good idea, as is changing the press of feet on your machine as well. So let me just, oops, put the sleeve up there. So let me just change this over. And if you've got an automatic threader on your, not an automatic threader, but a little threading tool for your needles on your machine, it makes a huge difference to the length of time and the frustration levels for changing your threads over. But if you've not, maybe it's one that you look for if you do decide to go for a new machine at some stage. Then we're going to be working, I'm going to be working with the right side of the fabric up. I'm going to take my stitch length up to a 3, and I'm going to loosen off my tension on my tension dial down to a 2. We want these to be quite big, well not too big, but we want them to be bigger than normal stitches, and we want them to be loose, so the bobbin and the top thread are quite loosely woven around each other. And then you're going to locate where your first notch is, which is down here, and where your last notch is. We aren't using the centre one at the moment, that's for placement later, but we're going to then just sew around the curve here. And the first row of stitches has to be quite close to the edge, because we've only got about 1/8 of an inch in from the edge, because we've only got so about 1/4 centimetre, won't it? Because we've only got 1/4 of an inch seam allowance on here anyway, so it's going to feel quite close to the edge. And we're not going to reverse stitch. you're just going to just sew around the edge here. And if you need to, we are going to pivot because we're on a curve, remember. So you can see me just stopping every now and again and lifting the presser foot slightly, and that will just give us that ability to go around this curve. Just try not to go off the edge. Then once you've done that, take your threads out and then leave a thread. Oh, the other thing is you need to leave a thread at the beginning. If you've got a machine that cuts the threads for you, you need to switch that off for a moment because you need to have some threads at the beginning and some threads at the end. Once you've done that row of stitches, we're then going to go approximately 1/4 inch inside into the sleeve inside those and do another row of stitches. But you don't want your row of stitches to cross over each other. They've got to have a gap in between them. So even though you might get close, don't overlap your stitches at all. I'll show you what I mean in a second. Just follow the edge of the curve. And then leave your tail. So I've got 2 rows of tails, and sorry, 2 sets of tails here and here, and then we've got those 2 rows of stitches going around the top like that. And the stitches are nice and loose. They're not supposed to be tight because these will be coming out afterwards, so you want them loose so that it comes out easily. Put that onto both of your sleeves, okay? The other thing I want you to just to notice as well is that the longer of the ski slope of the curve, if you like, the less severe slope, that one is the one for going at the back. So we need to just bear that in mind when we're doing it. So let's turn this one over so we've got the right side up, and then we're going to do those same rows of stitches on here. So you can do those as well, and I'll do those in a minute. Once we've done that, what you can do is, if we go to the bobbin threads, and if you need to, use a quick unpick or just something just to separate out the two, because the threads can get twisted around each other sometimes. So we just need to pull that through. So you want to have the 2 bobbin threads together and then the 2 top threads on the back there. And then if you hold onto your fabric with your thumb and your finger and sort of on top of the stitches, you can pull on the threads and you can see that that all starts to bunch up. See how that's all bunching up? And what you can do is by holding onto your threads again, just wrap them around your fingers, you can then smooth those threads closer up towards the top of the shoulder. And I always take the threads from either side and go into the middle when I'm gathering, just so that I make sure I don't eventually sort of go off the edge at some stage, just by mistake, you know, sort of pull all of the threads out, because then we'd have to be sewing our sleeves back in again. But what you get is when you do this on this edge here, look at that lovely curve there over the shoulder that we get. And that's what we're looking for. This is how we're setting sleeves and on jackets and what have you. Now, if you are a beginner, changing your threads is going to help you, and doing this curve is going to help you. I don't want you to get too hung up on whether or not you get some little puckers in your stitching when we stitch it into the shirt. As you get more experience, the idea will be that you'll be able to set this sleeve into the shirt or into a jacket or whatever you're making without sewing in any of these little tucks into the top. By contrast, if you're making a dress or a lady's blouse, quite often these little gathers can be a feature on the head of a sleeve at the top, and so then you would then sew those in. But on a gentleman's shirt, generally you wouldn't have these sewn in. And this is the first time I'm making this shirt, so I'm not sure whether we can do it with or without, but we're just going to cut ourselves some slack before we start, that if it doesn't go in without any of the little puckers, then we're not going to beat ourselves up about it, because we will get better as time goes on. But I want to make sure that I'm putting the longer curve to the back, which I am going to do here. So I'm putting my shirt up against it, so that I've got the wrong side of my shirt up and the wrong side of my sleeve up down in this bottom corner here. And the first thing I'm going to do is make sure my gathering threads are out of the way, and then I'm going to match up my back of my shirt there with a little pin. So that's the first part. So we've got the side seam and the underarm seam going together. So let me just straighten this out for you so you can see where I've just put that pin. So the pin's just going just there. Then I'm going to go to the other side and I'm going to match up the point before we go down to the underarm seam and the side seam, and we're going to match that up together and put a pin in. And we're just matching the edge of the sleeve head edge. Oh, that's a bit of a tongue twister. The sleeve head edge together. And then we're going to find our little notch, which is in the centre, and that's going to sit directly. We're going to match that up with the top of our shoulder seam. And we're going to put a pin in there. So at the moment we've got 3 pins, but we've got all of our reference points we need now in order to get this to fit in. So hopefully you're with me now. So that's what it looks like now if I hold that up for you. So you've got a sleeve at the underarm point, sorry, a pin at the underarm point, a pin at the other underarm point, and then the notch is matching onto the shoulder seam. Then it's a question of just either tightening or loosening off these gathers until the 2 edges, raw edges of the shirt can lie on top of each other on all the same length. Ignore the gathers in the sleeve and the top of the sleeve at the moment. We're just trying to get the edges of the raw edges together and the same length. So let's come down to the bottom here. I'm starting to put some pins in now that I'm confident that that feels right. And I'm just using my fingernails just to smooth out those gathers that I put in originally. And with putting sleeves in, you do tend to use a lot of pins, so just be aware of that. So that's one side done. Now we're going to go on to the other side, and I can see that my sleeve head edge is too short for my actual shirt, and that my gathers are too bunched up. So I'm just going to use my fingernails just to ease those gathers out a little bit. So ease them round so that it starts to feel like those edges can go, the raw edges of the shirt sleeve, the raw edges of the shirt can match the raw edges of the sleeve and sit nicely together. Sometimes as I'm sort of doing and talking, it's difficult to get the right words together, but hopefully it all makes sense. Just rewind the video if you're not sure, and just or watch ahead and see what we end up doing, because sometimes that can help, can't it, to look forward and see what's actually the end result is, and then you can then come back and see what actually needs doing. Oops, pin go through my fabric, that's it. So I've got, as you can see, I've got quite a lot of pins in there, and this is how I will do my shirt. But when we turn it over to the other side, if we just look without pulling it too far away, then we've got a lovely sleeve head going into a shirt there. And it may be that we'll get the odd pucker, but it's going to go under a jacket, so that's not going to bother me on this small scale. But if it bothers you, then just keep working with your fabric and just using your fingernails just to ease it out, so that where in between those 2 rows, you've not got any big puckers that you're going to sew over and sew in. And it is possible, with a little bit of patience and a little bit of experience too, in order to do that, but it can just take a little bit of time just to get used to doing that and working with it. But you can do it. I've got every confidence in you. Okay, once we've done that, you can either tack this now, and I'd probably use a different colour thread to my gathering stitches, but you can tack that, and I'd tack it just one side towards the seam allowance of your first row of your gathering stitches, in order just to hold that in place. But if I'm just going to move those. Sorry, I'll just notice some gathering. I can move some of this fullness down. So, and just readjust it as you want. Just because you've put a pin in doesn't mean to say it has to always stay like that. You can move it along as you want. Okay, that's better. Sorry, I was saying, if you're working on the smaller characters, you might want to tack this first before you actually sew it on the machine. As you get bigger at the animals, the bigger sizes and scales, then that might not matter so much to you, and you might be able to just go ahead and just sew it. But what we do need to do is change our thread over to our actual same colour as our shirt that we're using, which I'll do now, and then we'll sew this sleeve in and see how we get on. The thing that I want you to do before, and I've changed my threads over to the white again, is to check your tension. Just make sure you've turned your tension back up again after using it for your gathering stitch, because you'll need that to be at your normal. My normal is about a 5, so that's where mine is now. I'm also going to take my stitch length back down to construction, which is 2.2, and then I'm going to be sewing this sleeve in. I'm going to sew it with the actual body of the shirt down against my sewing machine bed. Just make sure that you've got your facing folded away from your shoulder seam, because you don't want to sew that in by mistake. Then going to adjust my stitch needle position so that I'm on my 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I can use the end of my presser foot for that. And we're going to reverse at the start and the stop as well. So a few stitches forward, start and stop, and then needle in the work. And we're going to take our time doing this. This isn't a time for going really zoomy and fast, because you'll only spend time unpicking otherwise if it goes wrong. So I really do suggest that you take your time when you're doing this section. We're going to follow the edge of the sleeve, the arm side, as we go around here, which means that we might need to manipulate the fabric underneath as we're sewing. So this is my sleeve here, and then this is the body of the shirt underneath. So let's just turn, if you've got a speed control, turn the speed down, or just take it steady with your foot on the pedal, because we want to do this nice and slowly so that we can feel our way as we're going through to sew this in. So we're going to take a few stitches forward towards our next pin, and we're going to follow the curve of the machine as we go, as the curve of the machine, of the arm side as we go. And if we need to stop with our needle in our work and then pivot slightly, we're going to do that. We're also going to be at the same time just keep adjusting the shirt underneath, not the sleeve necessarily, so that the next centimetre or 2 in front of your presser foot is actually, let's see if I can get that so you can see a bit better, is actually flat in front of there. Can be tricky, but it can be done. Don't worry if you sew over your gathering stitches. That's sort of, you know, part of what has to happen sometimes. But every now and again, just stop and just sew, just make sure that your shirt is flat underneath, because we don't want any to sew any puckers into the actual body of our shirt. We're actually just happy if those go into, well, not happy, but we won't beat ourselves up if they go into the actual sleeve head. So as you can see, I'm just taking the pins out as I go, and I'm working with the fabric and the curve of the fabric just to make sure that the next centimetre or 2 is fine. And then I stop, take out a pin, and I can always lift up my presser foot and just adjust the fabric just to make sure that everything's all lying nice and flat. And then we start going again. Just take it nice and steady. Remember just to keep pivoting and just to adjust your shirt, just to make sure that it's as flat as it can be. And then we're going to come off the end just here on this final pin. So we're always just trying to follow that curve that's cut into the pattern, and then reverse at the end. And then we'll take this out and have a little look and see how we've done. Let's take off our starting and stopping thread straight away. Oops, can't get hold of that bit. And then let me just move my machine. Right, let's have a little look. So what we're looking for is that the body of the shirt doesn't have any puckers in it sewn into it, and if possible the shirt doesn't have any puckers sewn into it, which can be hard to see when we first have got to do it because of the gathering stitches. But you can pretty much have a look and just have a see. I'm happy with that at the moment. I've not got any big folds in there, and if I've got this little tuck, I'm not going to go crazy about. So then we can go on to before I move the gathering thread, if you find you've got a big tuck, say on the body of the shirt there's a tuck, all you do is go on to the inside, find out where the tuck is, and undo the stitch with your quick unpick right on top of that crease, and then go a few stitches before and a few stitches after. Just use your fingers then to try and lie that fabric out flat on the shirt, and then re-sew it, just going over a few of your stitches before and a few stitches after, in order just to re-sew it. So don't take everything out and don't rip the whole seam out, because it's only one little section that needs your help and your assistance. So just take out those stitches and you'll find it'll all come together. When you're ready to do that, and I would strongly suggest you do that with your gathering stitches still in. But once you've corrected anything like that, then just pull on your gathering stitch, and you can see how with having that loose bobbin thread it just pulls it out. And then we want to take out the underneath thread as well. And then we're going to pull on our top thread, and that comes out as well. If it gets stuck, just remember what I said before, just cut the thread one side of where it's got stuck, and then it should just pull out for you. It just means then the sewing machine needle has pierced the actual thread itself, and because it's twisted, isn't it? So therefore it creates a knot. So there's our sleeve in there. I've got a few little, as you can see, little gathers in there, but I think that those would press out if I took it to the press, but it doesn't bother me, so I'm not going to be too concerned at this moment in time. Once we've done that and we're happy with that, we're then going to take this back to the sewing machine again. We're going to go onto a zigzag stitch. We had a 3 width, if you remember, and a 2 length, and then we're just going to neaten this stitch here, this sewn edge. So I'm just sewing on the seam allowance, and I'm just adjusting my shirt and making sure that the actual body of the shirt stays underneath. I call it a swoosh. Do a swoosh with your hand and just make sure that all of your fabric for your actual main shirt is out of the way for you. Then just keep adjusting it so you've got everything together. Don't want to sew anything you don't want to. And as I said before, if you've got an overlocker, you can use an overlocker, or you can use your pinking shears if you want to, or just gently overstitch it if you want to as well. You can do that too. Take off any whiskers you need. And there we've got our sleeve in there beautifully. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put my other sleeve in, but I'm just going to follow exactly the same process, so you don't need to watch me. You can rewind the video back in order to see it, and it'll hopefully make the video a little bit shorter, and then I'll come back to you when we do the next section. Okay, so I've got both my sleeves in now. There's the one of them. Can't remember which one was first and which one was second now. And that's the other one. And I've neatened both of the edges. There is a little tuck in that one. As I said, it's going to go under a jacket. It doesn't bother me, so that's fine. But as I say, if you wanted to, just take the tuck out. As long as I've not got any gathers on tucks on the actual garment itself, rather than just on the sleeve, then I'm quite happy with that. So this is how it's looking at the moment. So we've got our collar, we've got our 2 front pieces, we've got our sleeves set into our back, and then we've got the back of our shirt here. So what we're going to do now is fold the front. I've got the right side up, and I'm going to fold the front over so that we can match the sleeve hem and put a pin in there, put those 2 raw edges together. We're then going to go to the underarm point, and we're going to match our sleeve underarm point together, and that should just sit nicely for you. Just put a pin through that seam allowance, or just in front of it, it'll just help. And then go down to the bottom of the hem edge, and then you're going to match up the bottom of your hem edge as well, and just match those together. And you want to make sure that these seams, these raw edges are lined together, and then just pop in as many pins as you need just to make you feel comfortable for sewing that. And what we're going to do now is take this to the sewing machine. I'm going to take off my zigzag, and then we're going to reverse at the start and stop and with our 3/4 of an inch seam allowance again, and we're going to just do a couple of stitches just to reverse at the bottom there, needle in the work, and then we'll take our pin out for our underarm seam. So I've started at the hem of this sleeve, and I'm going to now work along this edge here, and I'm going to stop when I'm on top of the seam. So I'm going to get in close. Let's take the pin out, but then I'm aiming for where the underarm seam goes together, and I'm going to stop on top of that. Then I'm going to leave my needle in the work, lift up my presser foot, and I'm going to change direction now to come down the side seam of the shirt, and I'm just going to carry on again, and then reverse at the end. Needle out, and then I'm going to just cut through our threads. And what this does, it just joins that sleeve in to make it into the round, and then it starts to pull together the sides of the shirt as well to make it look like it's a proper shirt. I'm going to do the other side now before we actually switch on to zigzagging, because that's just more economical with time. So we're just going to repeat the process on the other side now. And if you start with your sleeve edge, because you've got that hem to follow, then that is a really good starting point just to help you know that you're in the right place and you're putting the right bits together. Then go to the underarm where you sewed your sleeve in, start and stop. Put a pin in just there, just to hold that point together, that's a reference point, and then down your side seam. If it doesn't match up perfectly, that could be because of mine doesn't quite, but that can be just adding the seam allowance that we did ourselves earlier. That can just happen. Don't worry about that. I'll talk to you about that in a minute, how to manage that. But just make sure that this side seam on the shirt is lying flat together. There's no gathers in there. So don't force it, is what I'm saying. But your sleeve edge should fit perfectly together. So let's just sew that one again. A few stitches forward, a few stitches back, and then down. Sometimes it gets caught on that hem edge. And we're again aiming for that underarm seam, so needle in the work so we can pivot. And so just trying to stop on top of the stitch line. One more stitch, that's it. Then press the foot up, let's pivot and turn the shirt round, and then we can change directions and come down this side here. And then we're just going to reverse at the end here. Needle out of the work, take our threads off. And then what we're going to do now is we're just going to sew along here, and we're just going to neaten these edges with a zigzag stitch again. So let's put it back onto the zigzag stitch. I've got a zig and a zag width of 3, and I've got a stitch length of 2, so that will work nicely. Just be careful that your machine doesn't get too bunched up on the sleeve edge. You can always just pull gently on your starting threads if you need to, just to pull it through your machine. And I didn't need to pivot down the end there. It just managed to just coerce the fabric around the right way. And then on here you'll see I've got quite a few whiskers, so I'm just going to take all of those off, just making sure not to cut through my zigzag stitches, otherwise they won't be able to do their job. Just take those whiskers off, just all nicely all the way down. It's only a little bit, but it does make a difference, so that neatens that up. And then we're going to just go ahead and zigzag on the other side here as well. So I'll do that and then I'll come back to you. Okay, so once we've finished that, we've got both of our sleeves and our side seams sewn, and we've neatened those edges, and we can turn this round. It's starting to look like a real shirt now, isn't it? Really special. Now there's a couple of things that I will do now before moving on to the hem, and I suggest that you consider doing the same as well. So once we've got this turned round, got a few threads, is that on the inside of the seam of the sleeve, I don't like it when the seam allowance pokes up like that, especially when my character's wearing it. So what I do is I smooth the seam allowance towards the back usually, and then very carefully feed it into my machine so that I can fold back the hem and just see the little bit of seam allowance. So I kind of just, it's only like, you're only going to get like a centimetre or so, and then trying to match up on the existing sewn line, and this might be a step too far, you can also do this by hand if you want to, if you don't want to do it by machine, is I then just put a few stitches across, and it's quite thick because of the hem, so just be aware that your machine might object a little bit or get stuck. But I just tack that seam allowance down so that it's flat against the sleeve. Can you see it? So if I show you this one, look how that one sticks up, and that's the difference between the two. So let's do the same on this one. because I do like how that looks. And because of these cuffs are so small, you'd really struggle to machine sew these shut down if you'd got if you waited until later to do the hem. So if you did the hem after you've sewn the sleeve, as you can do on a children's garment, on these they're just too small, so you wouldn't be able to do that. So I do that. The other thing that I want you to do is look at your collar now, because now that we've got our sleeve in and looking lovely, we can just sort of smooth out that front so that the collar's sitting nicely, and pinch the collar and the facing inside towards the sleeve, because then what we can do is we can match that up with a pin just to hold that still for us, and do the same on the other side. So just get your collar so that it's sitting nicely against the curve of the sleeve, and then pinch it all together and just put a pin through everything. We're not going to sew through the collar, we're just going to sew through the seam allowance and just tack this facing down, because that really does give a nice little finish on the inside. So I'm just get a little bit of thread and a hand sewing needle. Thread only needs to be single, that's fine. But what I want you just to do then is, so if you once you've pinned it, that's fine. It was just to hold on to it. So we can take that pin out. So once you've got your finger, I've got my finger on the inside on the other side, and the thumb, and then just where you've got your zigzagged edge, I'm just going to start the stitches off with a couple of stitches, and then I'm just going to then through to the seam allowance on top of the shoulder, just pick up a couple of stitches there, and I'm just attaching this facing to the inside of the seam allowance for the sleeve. You only need a few stitches, it's just really just to hold it down. You don't want to go through your collar still needs to be flat, and you don't want to be able to see any visible stitches on your shoulder seam either. Literally just the edge of the zigzagged edge of the facing, and that's just going against the neatened edge of the shoulder seam. Just a few stitches like that, and then we can cut the thread, and we'll do the same on the other side. So again, once you've got everything together, just you can take your pin out and you can hold everything together, and then we're going through the edge of the, so locate where your seam allowance is for your shoulder, and then we're just going to go through the seam allowance on the edge, well not seam allowance, where we've zigzagged and neatened on the edge of the facing, and we're just touching that down just to the seam allowance edge of the sleeve. Just loosely, don't have to do it tight. Just do a few stitches just to hold it in place, and just go back and just make sure that your collar's still loose and that you can't see any stitches on the outside of your shirt, because we don't want to spoil it, do we, now that we've taken so much care. Okay, so that will do for me, so that's fine, I'm happy with that. So just snip that off. As I say, it's just a couple of housekeeping things, but it just means that your facing now will sit nicely against the back of your shirt, and when Harvey's wearing that, let's just try it on him, because it's always nice just to make sure that the sleeves fit and they're not too tight, and they fit beautifully. And then we can lay his collar down nicely as well. Look, we're going to have this little overlap at the front, that's where your little press studs and buttons are going to go. Sleeves are perfect length, look, just like that, and you can just shush them up a little bit if you need to, but mine seem to be sitting quite nicely. There we go, we'll shush him a little bit, Harvey, and his collar sitting nicely. So the only thing that we've got to do now is we've got to neaten off the bottom of the hem, and then we're going to be sewing our buttons on and doing our press studs for the closure. You could on a shirt like this possibly do little button holes. They can be quite fiddly, so press studs will probably be your friend in this case, in order just to sew that together. So let's get ready, and we'll sew the hem first, and then we'll do our buttons and our press studs. So on our shirt we've got this very lovely and authentic curved hem, and that's lovely, but it can cause us one or two little issues. One thing that you can do on your pattern, should you wish to, is take the longest point and just square it off if you wanted to, especially if you're a beginner. This is on the pattern before you cut it out, so it'll be on future iterations of the shirt. Then you'd need to, if you made it again, then you could choose to do that. Because the curved hem can be a little tricky to sew, and it's just to do with this curve and making sure the fabric goes in, especially if we turn it over twice. And there's a couple of things that we can do to help with that. One is that we can zigzag along this hem and then just turn it up once and then sew it down, and that would still be perfectly adequate because it's going to be tucked into Harvey's trousers anyway when he's wearing the shirt. The other thing that I've found useful before is to run a row of stitches 1/4 of an inch in from the edge with my machine all the way around, and that gives you something to fold your hem up to, which helps. The main problem is that when you've got an edge like this, you're actually on a bias, and that means it just goes diagonally across. We talked about those warp and the weft threads going north to south and east to west. But if you look at the threads here, they go onto the bias, so they're going at the 45-degree angle across those threads, and it means that this edge here will stretch. And sometimes we want it to stretch and sometimes we don't, and this is one of the cases where we don't want it to stretch, so it can just be a little bit tricky sometimes to sew. But we're going to work on it together and we'll be fine. The first thing I'm going to do is, I know that I've got a difference in height here on my side seams, so I'm just laying the front against the back at that side seam, and I'm just going to trim them so that it matches to the shortest one. So let's just and I'm only taking off that amount of fabric. It's nothing really, but it'll just make the transition easier between the two. So if you just fold your shirt front against the back, the curve will match further down, but just here, look, we've just got this little difference just here, look. So I'm just going to take that off to the shortest one just to make them both equal, just so that transition is just nice. As I say, it's just such a small amount, it's not going to make much difference. Okay, so I will be pressing my seam allowance to the back for my side seam, so they'll both go in towards the back, and I'm going to just run one row of stitches across the front here. The first thing that I'm going at 1/4 of an inch on our seam allowance. So let's open out the front facing, and we'll include that in with it, and I'll show you what we'll do with that later. But for now, we're going to just go put our machine back on again, get it set up for our 1/4 inch seam allowance, and just following the exact lay. I'm not reversing and starting and stopping, but I'm going to put my needle in my work just so that we can pivot, because we're on a curve, remember. And you've got to be careful just not to pull on your fabric at all, especially on these curves, because it will stretch it and make it even longer than we want it to be. So just take your time and just do it really gradually. Just going to do just a stitch across couple of stitches across that side seam. It's just straight across rather than at an angle. As soon as I see the fabric start to bunch up, then I'm just pivoting slightly. Stitches across, and then down the other side, and round It's almost like stay stitching, if you've heard of stay stitching. It just kind of stabilises this hem edge. Move it out. Let's take off our end threads and our starting thread, and you'll notice that I didn't reverse on either of those. Okay, so what that's given us is just this lovely stitch line, just 1/4 of an inch in from the edge, which hopefully you can see just there. Because what I'm going to do now is get the iron and the ironing board. We're going to be using I'm using my wool pressing mat because I can pin into it, and some ironing boards you can pin into as well. And I've got my iron warming up. Now what I want to do first is start with this back edge, because we know at this centre back here that that's going to be fairly straight and flat. So what I'm doing is I'm folding the hem edge up so that the edge my stitches that I've just sewn are just on the very fold line on that edge. Just using my fingers just to press it as I go around, and I'm just going to pin this curve in place on my ironing mat all the way up to the side seam. Try and keep that stitched edge right on the edge, just to keep it nice and straight, and these pins will just help hold it in place for us whilst we just give it a quick press. So that's one side already done. That one's just not quite on the edge. You can just use your fingernail just to pull it back if you need to at all, if it's not quite in the right place. And then we're just going to carry on the other side as well. And we're trying to preserve as much of that curve as we can do, because that's going to make it nice on the shirt when it's finished, look nice and authentic. As I say, in future iterations you might choose just to do a straight hem on the bottom of your shirt and just change the pattern, you know, just find the longest point and then just draw it out straight to just follow the side seam down and follow the bottom of the tail of the back of the shirt down, and just make sure those lines just intersect, that's the word I wanted, and that will then do that for you. So now that we've got this down, I can just use the nose of the iron just to press this hem in between those pins nice and flat. Just going to give us a nice little edge there. Then we can take our pins out and put them into the board. I'm going to be needing those in a moment or two while we do the fronts. And now the pins are out, again I can just go further in and just press that down so that it lies nice and flat. Oh, a bit there's just folded over. So let's now move on to the front. I'm going to do both fronts the same, so I'll show you one, but then you'll go on and do the same with the other one. And we're going to do the same thing again. We're just going to fold it up to that 1/4 inch edge. Hopefully you can see what I'm doing, I think you can. And just put a pin in just to hold it. Don't worry if you get a little like fold or pleat or gather in the top of the hem, because that's quite common on these curved kind of shirts to get that. And what I suggest is that you go to about 1 inch towards your front facing, that edge that we neatened. Don't go all the way to the very edge, and I'll show you why we don't go all the way to the very edge in a minute or two. But we just want to just press that edge down, and then again we're going to take the pins out, and now we can press it with those edges in, again leaving that inch or so at this edge free. So you'll do the same again on your other front, just the same way. Once you've done that, I then want you to fold it again so that you're encasing your raw edge in that seam, but you just go into the same depth as your original seam was. So you're taking up another 1/4 inch really, and you can check that with your seam gauge should you wish. So I'm back working on the back now, just trying to get this to curl in nicely. Just try and preserve that curve as much as you can do, all the way around. Just making sure that you're not taking too much of your seam allowance. If this is all looking a bit fiddly for you, then don't forget, just zigzag around the edge of your seam on the raw edge, just turn it up once the same way that we have done, and then you'll be able to just set that down. This is if you just want the double turned hem, but it is a little more advanced than a beginner skill. Okay, so that's all nice. So again, let's now press in between those pins with our nose of our iron, just to give us a nice crease to work to. And then once we've got that done, let that just cool off for a moment or two. always best to let it go cool if you can do, or you can just blow on it gently. That'll help it cool off quicker. And then once we can then hold it with our fingers and just press it in place, just finally. Watch out for the steam because it's hot. Okay, and we've got a nice curve on the back of our shirt back there. And then we'll do the same with the front again here. We'll just fold that over again, trying to preserve as much of the fold as we can do. But again, just leave that inch towards the edge of the front of the shirt clear. Don't forget to go right up to your side seam. You can just sort of pull the hem edge back if you think it's going a bit too thick with your pin before you pin it in place. But that row of stitches that we did first just gives you something to work to nicely before you get on with actually pressing it in place. Just got a little bit just at the top there, at the top of that kind of where the side seam is, that's going to be a little bit thinner than the rest of it, but I'm not going to worry too much. If it was an adult garment or a children's garment I would, but we'd have more scope to work with. It's just because these are smaller and fiddlier. Okay, so you're going to do the other side as well the same, which I've left for now, but you're going to do all the way along each the same way. Before you go rushing off to the sewing machine though, what I want to talk to you about is how we're going to neaten this edge here. Because what I actually want you to do is to measure in, let's see how much it is. It's for the button placket, so it's about 1/2 inch, which is about 1.5 centimetres. So 1.5 centimetres in, I want you to make a fold. So you're going to fold the facing back so that you've got the right sides of your shirt together, and it's for about 1/2 inch, which is why we left that inch uncovered. Okay, that's going to do for me. And then what I want you to do is I'll put a pin in just to hold that back. Now what I want you to do is pay attention where your fold is. So we've got one fold on the stitch line, and then we've got another ironed in fold on the other section. Can you see? And I want to sew right where that fold here without the stitches on meets the facing, and I'm just going to start at the edge of the facing and go to the corner and then just reverse back just to hold it. All will make sense in a moment. So we're just going to sew this facing back on itself for now. So line up the machine and take my pin out because it's not a very big seam at all. I'm just going to start sewing, reverse, and then go to the end and then just to reverse again. Let's take our threads off and I'll show you what it looks like. So it just looks like that. So here's the front facing of the shirt going down from the collar. It's been folded back to the right side, and then I've looked for where the crease is here, and where that is I've just sewn that across. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take off the corner of the that we've stitched down, and I'm going to trim my facing back a little bit as well. So you're left with that. So we've got the cut off at the corner and then trim the facing down. Because the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to turn that corner round to the right side. And we're going to use a pin just to pull out the corner to make sure that's going to sit nice and flat for us. Oh, I have pulled a thread. Sometimes you'll pull a thread like this out when you're doing this. Just snip it off if you have to. Ideally you won't do that, but it does happen sometimes, even for everybody. Then what I want you to do is, so we've got this nice little corner on the edge of our facing now. There's the collar and there's the nice corner. But you can see how we've unfolded the hem. So I want you to just open it back up again a little bit. Just fold the first fold of the hem over, and then fix that back inside so that it's folded over inside your hem. Hopefully you can see that. And then the rest of the hem is down. Put pins in if you need to hold your hem. It's especially at these side seams as well, where it might want to unravel. And if you're not using a cotton fabric, then sometimes this can sometimes unravel, but with a cotton fabric generally it'll hold a crease really well. So just put in a few pins in there. It seems to have gone a bit skewy, but I'm not going to worry too much because it's going to be hidden inside his trousers. And then I can't finish mine because I've got to press mine first. But once, I'll go and do that in a second, but once we've done that, then we're going to sew across here. But we've just got a nice edge on the bottom of our shirt tail here, and that's all going to sit all nicely when we come to sew the front section of the shirt. So if that's the top, here's that front placket that we're creating, there's the bottom of it, and then we're going to sew around this shirt. So let me just press and sort out this front section, and I'm going to do my facing there, and I'll come back to you when I'm sewing my hem. Okay, so I've got all the pins in my hem now, holding that all down. Now I'm just going to go to my sewing machine. I've got the right side up on my sewing machine. Sorry, I've got the wrong side up on my fabric in order that we can sew this. And I'm not going to do a reverse stitch. We're going to neaten off those edges like we've done before. So don't reverse stitch at the start and the stop, just start stitching. Keeping your 1/4 inch as you can on the bottom of that hem, just on the top there. Try and keep your hem even if you can do. Put your needle in your work so that you can see where you're going, and it'll hold everything all still for you. And then mine is going narrower over the top of where the side seam is. And I'm just aware that I might need to just help my fabric through a little bit where it's a little bit thicker. That's it, through. So just make sure you just catch the edge of that hem. Follow the curve round. Pivot if you need to, but at the moment it seems to be going quite nicely round without needing to pivot. Right on that edge of the hem. Coming up to the side seam, so I'm just making sure my sleeve's out the way so it's not going to get sewn into my hem at all. Just going to pivot slightly just there. When I get to the end, I'm not going to reverse stitch again because I want to have a nice little neat finish on the edge there. Oops, needle out of the work, press the foot up, and then leave some threads on the end. Right, let's have a little look. So on the back we've got a nicely curved seam with no puckers in that seam at all, and on that edge or on there. And then on the inside here we can see our seam is all sewn there. If you get a little pucker like I have just there, I'm not going to worry. So long as it looks nice and neat on the outside, the outside, I'm not going to worry too much. It's just where the excess fabric has to scrunch in to preserve that curve. So then let's just take a hand sewing needle and my glasses. And then from the inside of the garment, separate out your bobbin thread and your top thread. And then if you pull on the bobbin thread, you'll get a little loop come up in your thread just down here, look. And that will then pull your top thread through to the back. Then once we've got that done, we're then going to tie that twice in a knot. This is just all part of that lovely neat finishing off that we want to try and use to elevate our sewing. You can reverse stitch if you want and just snip your threads off, but this I just think elevates it and just finishes it off nicer. Let's just thread those. So I've threaded both of those threads now, the bobbin and the top thread, so it's lovely and neat on the wrong side, on the outside. And then just where that thread knot is on the fabric, I'm just going to slide my needle inside the hem and travel along inside the hem for about 1 inch. And then I'm going to then pull on my needle, oops, if it'll come through, doesn't want to, there we go. and then I'm just going to hold on to the hem, but give the threads a bit of a pull, and your knot should then disappear inside the actual hem itself. And then if you then just put some pressure on your threads before you snip them, sort of just bunch it up a little bit on the hem, and then snip your threads really close to your fabric. The scrunching up that you've done will pull that end in, but it'll give it a nice long tail so it won't come undone. So that's got that all nice and neatly done. Just tidy up any threads that you see or whiskers that need coming off. So let's do it to the other side again. So let's find our bobbin thread, separate it out, give it a little pull, and you'll see the loop come through from the other side. And you can then pull it through with your needle, so you get a nice neat finish there. Tie our threads off twice. Nice and tightly and close to the fabric, and then we can then put our needle onto our 2 threads. Oops, I've only got one. Let me get the 2. There we go, that's better. And then we're going to put the needle point right in by the side of one of the stitches with the knot on it, and then slide that needle so that you can't see it from the front and you can't see it from the back, but it's actually coming out further down the hem. Let me just show you, like that. Pull your needle through and give a little tug on your threads, and that'll pull the knot inside into your fabric. A little bit of tension on the threads, snip close to the fabric, and then you'll be able to take those off, and you've got a lovely neat finish there, ready for the next bit. And then what I would suggest you do is just give your shirt a little bit of a press now, because we've got our beautiful collar made. So let me get my ironing board and iron and do that with you, because we now have our lovely collar. So let's give that. It's been manhandled, hasn't it, whilst we've been working on it. So that's our lovely collar. Let's press our lovely sleeves again, just making sure all that's nice. And you've got a lovely neatened shirt here with all of the raw edges all beautifully neatened inside as we've sewn along, so we've not got to go back and do any of those, which is great. Just iron this down as well, just give it a good press. Just makes it look nice and crisp, doesn't it, after we've done all that sewing. And then let's just smooth the front down. So let's make it straight at the side seams. And then we've got that hem where we turned it over. And let's just press up to the shoulder seams. Make sure your facing is lying flat, nice and flat inside. And then we can then fold over our other front and make sure that's all nice and flat. Side seam. We'll just iron the back as well, just to make sure that's all nice and on the job. Okay. So what a beautiful little shirt we've got here, all ready to try on to Harvey, because we need to check the button placement. So if you want to grab your character, if you can, if you've already made your character, and pop his shirt on from. It's still warm, Harvey. That's nice, isn't it? It'll warm you up after being cold without your clothes for so long. And then the way that we do the buttons traditionally, in the UK anyway, and it might be different in your country, so just check, or you might already know, is that if it's a girl, the right side goes on top, and if it's a boy, the left-hand side goes on top. Now, because we're looking at it the other way round, I often get mixed up. So the way that I always do this is I turn the character round to be facing so that I've got it against me, and then I can then work out which is my left, and then I'll put a pin in to my left side to know that that's the side that is going to go on top. And I also just make sure then that Harvey's tummy isn't too big for the pattern, so he's not had too many pies, but all sitting all beautifully, so we've not got to worry about that. He's got plenty of room in the back here, and the front will just overlap just beautifully, and then up to the top there he's got plenty of room for his chest as well, because we could move the press or the buttons out slightly should we need to, just to make sure that that's all nice and straight. And you can choose how much of an overlap you have on your shirt, I'm just going to do the 1/2 inch. There will be a little gap at the top of the collar just here for mine. Can you see there's a little gap where that's just crossing over the 1/2 inch, and that's where the little ribbon will go for his little necktie there. So everything's all looking good now, so let's take this off for you a second, Harvey. Sorry, you've got to be cold for a little bit longer, but it's coming. Let me get my buttons together, and then I will come back to, and press studs, and I'll come back to you and we'll talk about just sewing the press studs and buttons on. So I've just found some little buttons. I've got these little, oops, one's just on the floor. I need to go and find that now. There's little ones here. Now I've just used a colour that coordinates with the waistcoat that I'm going to be doing, but you can just use any colour you like. You can use white or what have you. And I've actually got 5 of those, one of which is on the floor. Let me just find that. I've had a little look and I can't find that button, so it's obviously popped off somewhere. So do be careful with your buttons because they will disappear if you're not careful. So I've got 5 buttons and we're going to space those evenly. Now, it might seem obvious, but I'm going to sew my buttons on first because I want them to hide the stitches for the press studs. If I sew the press studs on first, which are these things here, let me just show you one in case, I don't know what you call them in if you're in a different country. So they're a 2-part fastener, get the camera to focus, and they've got one with a little knobble on and one with a little like hole in, and the 2 clip together, and that's what fastens them. We call them, they're either snap fasteners or press studs, we call them in the UK. Or even though I'm not in the UK, I'm in Spain, but anyway, I don't know what the Spanish word is for them yet. So what we want to do is we want to just remember which side. So I've got my pin in to tell me which side needs to be on top. If this was a working shirt, i.e. we got buttons and buttonholes, then I would be putting the buttons on the right side for a left closing, for a male closing. But because the buttons will sit on the top with the press studs underneath, then I actually need to sew them onto the left side. So I need to sew them onto the side that's going on top with my pin here. And the first one I know I want to be right at the very top. So when I'm doing my press studs, I will put a little stitch first from the right side, not press studs, my buttons. And so my knot is just underneath the button. Then I'll carefully thread my button on. Just make sure your needle will go through the holes on your buttons, of course, before you start sewing. You can just check that, make sure that's all nice and neat. And then I'll start to then sew the button on. So the button is now attached to the thread, and I try and make sure that all of my holes on my buttons go the same direction when I'm sewing down them. So I'll hold the button in place with a fingernail, and then I'm just going to do several stitches backwards and forwards just to attach that button nice and neatly onto the shirt. And of course you can just use a coordinating button if you want to. So that's hold that on quite nicely. Now before taking my thread off, I'm going to turn it over, and where I've got my stitches, I'm now going to sew, which side should we do? We'll sew the point side. And the reason why I'm sewing the point side is because on the back, oh gosh, I'm not having a good day today. That's my press stud on, but I can see that. Okay. Working in miniature is fun sometimes, isn't it? Okay, so we've got the little press stud with the little knobble on it because the back of that is a little bit like a bucket, and so that will hide the stitches. So the first thing that I'm going to do before I drop it again is I'm going to use my needle just to go through one of the holes on the side of the press stud, because then we've got it. And then I wouldn't use a press stud that's bigger than your actual button, but if you put one finger under the other, you can kind of have it so that the press stud is right sat underneath where your press stud is. I can take that pin out now because we've got one of the buttons on. And yeah, I've not measured out any of the spacing of my other ones because I know that I want one button at the very top anyway. And then very carefully, trying not to go outside of the sort of radius of your button on the other side, I'm just going to catch just a few threads of the shirt fabric underneath the button just to attach this button, this press stud on. And if you're careful, you can actually sew it on without compromising the fabric on the front. Let me just put my glasses on because this is working in miniature. Just make sure that you can kind of feel it with your fingers to make sure your press stud is right underneath. And then I'm just going to take just 2 or 3 stitches. As I say, you might want to do more if you think that you've got grandchildren who might occasionally play with your dolls. But for me, my granddaughter's in the UK, so I don't get to see her as much as I would like. But it does mean my dolls are safe at the moment until she comes to visit. Right, I've got a loop, so I'm just separating out my threads just so I can pull on them individually just to get rid of that loop. Okay, and then once I've done that, I can go back to sewing this press stud back on again. You're just trying to make sure you can't see your stitches from the other side. And the reason you can't sew your press studs on first is because with your button you need to go in and out of your fabric. And I didn't want to separate out the facing and just sew through the facing, because I think that can leave it a bit gappy when your character's actually wearing your shirt, especially if it's not got a waistcoat over. I mean, luckily Harvey's going to have a waistcoat over. So I'm just going through each of the little holes in turn and just doing a couple of stitches underneath each one and just through the hole, and that will just attach that press stud on in place. And generally what I'll do is I'll do the top and the bottom buttons and back of the press studs first, and then I'll space the other buttons, depending on how many we're going to have, how many other buttons and buttonholes out neatly underneath those. So I'm just going backwards and forwards through my stitches just to neaten that off, just so that I can take the thread off. A little bit of pressure on the thread and then I can snip back in again. So there's the button on, and there's the press stud underneath. And because I've not cast off, we're trying to avoid any bulkiness. Got a little bit of a thread from my knot just there, which we can just take off. Okay, so then the next thing that I'm going to do now is go down towards the bottom of the shirt and decide where I want that next button to be. Probably around about there. So you usually have a bit of a gap at the bottom of a shirt, don't you? Let's put a little knot at the bottom here again. Let's trim our end of our knot off, and then I'm going to do exactly the same to sew the number 2 button on, but this one, as I say, is down at the bottom of the shirt, and you're trying to make sure that you're going about the same distance in from the edge as well. You don't want wavy buttons going down your shirt. So through from the underneath first and then back down 3 button. So it's onto your thread, and then you can then place it a bit more precisely. That button's upside down. Just make sure that you've got your buttons all the right side up, which I hadn't. But again, I don't edit these bits out where it doesn't kind of go right first time, because I think that it's then a way of me reminding you that that's the way that it can sometimes happen to you. So right, I've got the button round the right way round now. So again, let's just place it where we want it to be. I want my holes going across from left to right, so then I can then go through in my, hold it in place with my fingernail, and then take a few stitches through the button to hold that in place. So as I say, once we've got 3 or 4 stitches just holding that in place nice and securely, then we can turn to the other side, find our next press stud, and using a little bit with the knobble on. And before I drop it again this time, let's thread it onto our needle. Then we can position that directly over the button, and we're just going to do exactly the same again with this one. And then once I've got that one on place, it's then easier to see where you want to position your other buttons, and then I would sew them one at a time just making sure that you're happy with where they're going to go. So I will probably split the difference with this middle one first. So put that one exactly halfway through in between those two. And you can measure it as well with your seam gauge if you want to, from the middle of one button to the other. It's about every 2 inches, isn't it? So yeah, it is about 2 inches. So that will put that one in place, and then I will then do the same and measure the difference between the other two and put those two in place. And I'll come back to you when we're on to sewing the other part of the press stud in place, and I'll show you how I make sure I get those in the right place. But for now, I'm just going to sew these press studs on and buttons, and without hopefully losing any more, and I'll come back to you. Okay, so here we've got all of our lovely 5 buttons all sewn on, and with the corresponding snap part on underneath, and hopefully I think you'll agree they look nice and neat, and you can't see the stitches. So the next thing then that we're going to do is now we're going to lie the button side over the unbuttoned side, and this is where we're going to establish how much we're going to have at the very top here. Now I'm just going to wrap mine over so that the edge of the placket underneath matches the start of the collar, and that the edge of this placket here matches the start of that collar, and then holding it together so that the 2 neck edges are level. That's what's going to give me my placement for the underneath part of the press stud. So let's just put a pin in, and then we can just match, and where that pin has taken a bite of the fabric is exactly where I want to be stitching the point of my press stud. So the other cup section of my press stud, so that's going to sit just nicely. Let me just make sure I've got that, maybe just a smidge lower, just only like a thread or so. It's just worth taking your time just to make sure that you've got it exactly where you want to be. Yes, happy with that now. Let's put a knot in the bottom of our thread. And then to start this one off, I'm going to go on through the inside of the facing this time to where I can see my pin has gone through. This is just going to be to bury my knot. Oops. So right on top of where that pin is, where that knot is. Making sure that I've not gone through the other side. That buries the knot for me, and now I can come out just to one side of where that fabric is and that pin. And take the pin out now because that's done its job. Then we're going to get one of the little bucket pieces, and then I thread it onto my needle and thread, and then it's safe then, it can't ping off anywhere. Glasses down. And then we're just going to attach this on the same way. And I don't need to worry now about going through the fabric all the way. So we'll go through to the other side. Holding it in place with my fingernail. They are fiddly, so just be patient with it. Don't try and do this when you've got kids or pets around, because it will knock you off kilter. And also the little bits aren't good for them, are they, if they get dropped on the floor and can't be found. I'm sure my Hoover will find my missing button later. And I'm going to have this one sewn in and up, and then what I will do is I rest everything down on my work surface, make sure the bottom matches up on the hem, make sure everything's all fine, and then I will then peel back the edge of the shirt to where the button is, look for where the bobble is, and then just put a pin just to hold a couple of threads, and then I'll match it back up again and just make sure that I'm happy with where that is. And I'll do the same all the way up the buttons each time, probably do the bottom one, then do the middle one, and then do the 2 intermediate ones as well, just until I'm sure that I've got all of those in the right place and everything's all lining up really nicely, and that will then give you a nice front to the centre of your shirt, and everything will be all right. And then I'll meet you back to here again once we've done that, and we can just try it on Harvey and have a roundup. I've just finished sewing on my last press stud, so we're all done and all finished now, and I wonder how you think that's looking, whether you think that's looking great or not. I certainly do. Let's get Harvey in on the picture, and let's try this onto him and see how he looks. So arms in, because then the other thing is the finishing touch to the collar is, well, the outfit is the actual ribbon round his neck, isn't it, as well, which will give him his little neckerchief or cravat kind of effect. So let's do up your press studs, Harvey. Make sure they're all sitting nicely and in the right place for you. Adjust your sleeves. And let everybody have a little look at you. So there's Harvey in his shirt. Collar's just sticking up slightly there. That just needs pressing slightly just to stay down. Here's the back of the shirt. So there's plenty of room in there for him to wear that and to move. And the length is perfect as well with that double hem that we did on there. So the next thing that I've got then is I've got some of the ribbon from Lilly Rose Dolls here. This is the crushed ribbon. And then we will then just be putting this underneath his collar. Making sure we've got enough, but not too much, so we're not wasting it. I don't like wasting things if I can help it. And then we can tie that in a nice bow. And I believe that when we snip that off, oh, got your collar caught, look, Harvey. There we go. That is then how his collar is going to sit. Got a bit of a big bow on there. We'll adjust it just to fit his dimensions to make sure that it looks nice. But if we look at the collar, he's got a red bow on this one, but I'm not following the kit, so it's still the crushed ribbon, and they've got his collar sticking up slightly, which we can do and adjust once we've got his waistcoat on. But that's how it's going to look. Obviously I'll snip this off once I've got to the correct length, but hopefully you can see how smart Harvey is looking there in his lovely shirt. Let me just take this off for the moment, because the shirt is the star of the show, isn't it? And that's what we want to show everybody. So let me just turn the camera around and we'll have a round up, and then we can let you get on with finishing off yours. Okay, so there we go. Together we have sewn the most adorable shirt for one of your characters. Now, again, as I said in the beginning of the video, just because this has been sewn for Harvey today, don't think that it's only his shirt that follows these principles, because you will be able to use those for the different characters as well, and the clothes are interchangeable, obviously depending on the size, and this is the 16-inch that I've been making today. So yeah, so I'm really, really pleased with his shirt. I love the collar. I love the way that's you know, reaching to the top of his sleeves here. I love how beautifully it's sitting, and I love the front placket and the way that that's all gone together, and has been a really smooth process, I think you'll agree, all the way through. It's just been beautifully drafted. So I do want to say a really big thank you to Claire and Richard of Lilly Rose Dolls for gifting the pattern to me in order that I can bring these videos to you, because I do think that a little bit of visual help when you're making these types of garments can be a really helpful experience, especially if you're new to dressmaking or new to this type of garment sewing. And so I hope you agree and you've enjoyed it. If you found value in the video today, I'd be really grateful if you'd consider subscribing to my channel. It'd be great to know that you're there and you're following along. And if you want to pop in the comments where you're sewing with me from, then that'd be great, because I'm based in southern Spain, although I'm an English expat but living in southern Spain. So lovely to know where in the world you are. And if there's any of the garments that you would like to see made, bearing in mind that I'm going to be making his trousers next, and then his waistcoat, and then his jacket, and then his hat, then just drop me a note in the comments as well, or you can contact Claire and Richard at Lilly Rose Dolls directly and just speak to them about if they would like to see any videos. And obviously the more questions and the more requests we get, then the quicker those will jump to the top of the pile for those characters or for those garments. So if you need a bit of extra help, then just let us know. I can't guarantee when they'll be filmed, because you can consume the videos quicker than I can film and get them edited and get them uploaded, but I'll do my very best to be there to help you when you need it. And if this video's been up for a while, then there should be a few more for you to enjoy, and hopefully Harvey's complete outfit will be here very soon, and you'll be able to just jump from one video to the next. So on behalf of myself, I just want to say a really big thank you for being here today with me. I really love sewing along with you, and I just wish you all a great day and happy stitching, and I'll see you all soon. Take care. Bye.